Hello, welcome. I'm off this week, so I'm really excited to record again. I've been part of like a lot of seminars and like support groups this week just because I've had the time off. And it actually got me like kind of excited to talk and sit down and do my makeup again. Because what I've been involved in are like PD support groups. Like part of my research is into autism and ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence. And the conference I just sat through, it just felt like so needed. Like it felt like I was excited to be part of the space again. Um, it's one of those interesting things that like it almost doesn't matter. I don't want to say it doesn't matter because it's obviously incredibly important, but it's not like super important all the time. Whether you have kind of like the medical model or the social model, like is it a disability or is like ADHD only a disability because of the way we respond to it? Like those kind of arguments takes a back seat when you're actually like in the presence of people who are knowledgeable, who have it, who work with it, who treat it, people who at the forefront of thought don't get caught up in labeling. They just want to make people feel better. And that's kind of like what I am about. Labels can be really helpful and they can also be really counterproductive in a way that's definitely not good. So, I am very solution oriented in that sense where I just don't care. And again, I always say these things and then like catch myself and be like, no, I do care, but not in this circumstance of like talking about like, well, what do we know? What do the facts say? And just saying, well, let's quit arguing and let's just focus on the things that work that we know are true. And I know that that's kind of from a research perspective, that can sometimes be unhelpful, but there's always going to be research. We're always going to be researching things. So I think it has a lot to do more with our mentality and the way we message it than the fact that someone's actually going to stop researching something. That has to do with larger educational and public policies than our individual attitudes towards research. And the reason that comes up for me in particular in regards to ADHD and autism is I was actually watching, there were other speakers, but it was primarily Gabor Mate, who's kind of like famous/infamous for focusing on the social causes of ADHD. And we know, I say we, it should be common knowledge. If it's not though, there's time for learning. We know that ADHD is genetic. We know that there's a strong genetic component to it. We know that there are many biological factors. There is no ADHD gene that we know of, but it does run in family. I have it, and 3 of my kids have it, and it's not really a surprise when you get down to that third kid. We're like, it would be weird if he was normal at this point. Whatever quote unquote normal is, which is a whole debate in of itself. And he was talking about, the studies with twins, who'd have theoretically, right, identical genetics, identical twins, obviously not fraternal. And they have, sorry, I had to do a brief cut there. So what we were saying about the twins with the identical studies is that if they have the identical genetics, should they both have ADHD? If one does, shouldn't the other? And of course, because there is no ADHD gene, of course the answer is no, they don't. Now there's a 51% concordance rate, and 51% is incredibly high. That's one of the reasons we have so much confidence that ADHD is genetic. But that means that somewhere, I don't know, maybe in the 49 percentile, maybe it's only 1%. We don't really know, but we do know that there's a component of that is and isn't genetic. Maybe we should focus on that other 49% of... He's trying to crawl out of the room. Maybe we should focus on the other 49% of circumstance, since we can't control genetics, and it is incredibly unethical to assume that we do, to come up with ways to either prevent people from having children with disabilities, if that is your model, or to then terminate those pregnancies. Like there is no ethical solution other than to accept people with ADHD. Like human life is human life. regardless of whether you think it's a disability or not. It doesn't matter. You don't get to control the value of someone's life. So the solution then is to, well, how do we make their life as comfortable as possible? And you can't control the genetic component, so you control the component that is not genetic. You control factors like, I wish lifestyle were one of them. I wish you could just say, oh, if you don't smoke, you won't go to HD. But that's not what he was saying or observing. And what he was actually observing was, he turned off the light and turned on the fan. So my papers were blowing around. Like, it's just there to make my life more difficult. And no other parent can tell me otherwise. Children make your life more difficult. But what he was saying was, we can control neurological development, which occurs in utero. We can give women, better prenatal care, remove stress, give them better support structures, give them better insurance would be an example. I don't know if that's one he named, but we can, and I'm thinking of like things that are really toxic that can impact your neurology going up. So I'm trying to like expand on what he says. And one of the things that I was thinking of was like bullying. We can prevent bullying. Alcohol use at a young age is obviously extremely problematic, but we also know that most people who have ADHD, it's not from the alcohol use. It's not something that we've done into ourselves. It's not something that our fault. It's not the mother's fault for circumstances she can't control. But if there's hormones and stress levels, and if we had a physiological disease which was caused by something in environment, we'd sue those companies who put it in there. Movies about that exact subject. So when it's something though internal that's happening, that is extremely stressful to the mother, we don't necessarily prosecute. Not that that's always the option, right? That's not a realistic or probable option. What are we doing for those mothers? And so we end up medicating the child instead of changing our society. And I was so impressed by the conference. I actually started reading, I forget the title of his book, but it's Not Normal, basically, where we start exploring the ideas of there are so many stressors in our life that we are taking for granted, and we are taking them for granted unnecessarily. So we are saying that's normal, and it's not normal. We were never meant to live in nuclear households where women had absolutely no support, where they were trying to work full time and raise their kid full time and also be a chef and a cleaner full time. Like, it really touches into feminist issues, and he never mentioned, that once. Like, that is not the focus of his research. He's a physician. But it kind of created that like intersectionality of knowledge for me, which got me excited, because that's when things start clicking and just like making sense. I always find that really exciting when you start able to, it doesn't feel like you're learning a pocket of information. It feels like you've now entered like this network, and it's like numbers now running by you, like in the Matrix, and you just see everything, and you start seeing how everything is interconnected. And that's what I was starting to take away, was this perpetual stress that we live in is, we are accustomed to it. We view it as normal, but it is not normal. And one of the things and one of the effects that it may be doing is contributing to neurodivergence. If there are definitely genes surrounding ADHD, as we kind of cleared up before, but what triggers the expression of those genes? And I don't think that we have really thought a lot about that as a society, where we are saying like, hey, why don't all people have ADHD? Or why do some people get it and some people don't? Like, we haven't asked the questions of, well, what are the differences in these sets of twins, where some get it and some don't? what are the factors that contribute to gene expression is just so important for the next wave of research, and I hope truly that that's um, coming up next, because yes, ADHD is genetic, but that's not the part that we should be worried about. What the part we should be worried about is the societal influences on gene expression, and if there is such a thing, which again, I'm not a scientist in this field. Doing research for me is to be a consumer of research. I'm not necessarily putting it out, which actually I'm hoping I could get to do in a few years, but we'll see. There's a lot going on between now and then. When man make plans, God laughs. You know the drill. Um, but specifically regarding like his research and like the line of ADHD thinking, we could be um, it's like a new avenue to explore that I don't feel we're exhausted, and that's like it's exciting. It's an exciting time to be part of the ADHD community. And it does align very much with what I'm thinking, because people tell me, "Oh, I have this issue, I have this issue, I have this issue." My next question is going to be, "Well, so what? How does this impact you? What would you like to change?" Those are the issues that we focus on as counselors, um, because I can't diagnose or treat your condition, but I can counsel. So I'm going to counsel. I'm going to do what counselors do and counsel. Um, so I kind of forgot where I was going with that. But like I said, super, super good conference. Oh, I remember now. There's actually a book. I use the expression perpetual stress, but there's actually a book by the same title. It's an older book and it is a denser book, but well worth the read if you don't mind the density. Where he was talking about the effects of stress and how it causes that much anxiety and that much constant cortisol in our life. One, we're incredibly poorly suited to it as humans. Like, we're not meant to deal with that much stress. But it also links to other semi-neurological conditions, like such as mood disorders. Specifically in his book, he was talking about stress and anxiety and depression and mood disorders, which are not inherently neurological, but prolonged exposure can result in neurological changes, and you can end up with PTSD and other more significant factors. And that started to kind of get me the question of, is ADHD, and this is a question, so don't come at me if you disagree. I'd actually welcome your opinion on it, because no one person is the expert in the room. Like, you will never be smarter than everybody else you know. And if you're the smartest person in the room, you're not smarter than everybody else total in the room, is a good way. A mentor told that to me, and I just thought that was like really good advice. Like, you're never smarter than anyone else, you know. Um, these colors are really pretty, so I actually got like a little dumbstruck by like the metallic reflectivity of that. It's really, really pretty. Um, so yeah, I'd welcome any feedback if you have of different ideas. Um, but I do think it's interesting. Like, it has me wanting to learn more. Like, this idea that ADHD is a response to the expression of the gene family, which we know must be related to HD, is a response to trauma and stress during the neurological development of our young minds. And I don't mean like big T trauma. Could be big T trauma, but it could be little T trauma. Like, at least ask ourselves what the relationship is. Because then you have the idea you could actually prevent ADHD. Again, we can't prevent, nor am I advocating for the prevention of ADHD. But, well, of the genes for ADHD. But if you could actually prevent people from, that feeling of being lost, of that, not knowing where you are and where you have a place in the world, if you could actually prevent that, I don't know that that argument would be wrong. It's kind of like the reason I medicate my children for ADHD. It's not because I don't love them as they are, but what I'm doing is I'm trying to prevent those negative side effects. I'm like, you are the way you are, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if I can get you to go through without suffering because you are the way you are, that's definitely my goal as a parent. So like as a clinician, that does have me really excited. I'm like, is there an avenue of research where we can actually reduce the frequency and severity and appearance of ADHD? And again, whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to know, because it is more than just a science position. There is a moral component to choosing what genes are expressed and what's not, if we ever get to, that level of understanding with ADHD, which, to be fair, we're not at. And then the second, component and question I have to that is, even if we could, and even if it were moral, how would we do it? Because evidence right now is kind of pointing to systemic issues. It's kind of pointing to, at least in the US, our worker culture, where we have workaholism and we have constant stress. It's pointing to our nuclear family structure. It's pointing to food insecurity, patterns of unresolved trauma. Mental health care is not a system at all in the United States. You get access to it basically on how good your insurance coverage is, which varies considerably. So that's kind of the next step, is like, how do you change an entire culture which is toxic? If one of the reasons that we're seeing, unprecedented mental health disorders and unprecedented neurological disorders and, increased rates of everything, then how do you stop that? How do you say, nope, just fundamentally the way we're built, not just in the United States, but there's a lot of countries that also have Western practices, or highly Eastern, for example, practices that are bad in unique but different ways. Like, how do we... This is so pretty. I love this one. How do we go about solving that, even if we could? And I think the answer is, like, you have to attack the issues one at a time as they come up. You have to take one bite-sized chunk out of each problem that you can. It's the old expression in the metaphor, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? I think we're really realizing now, because we know, we're finding out that our toxic work conditions are also linked to increased rates of asthma. Poor mental health also results in cardiovascular conditions. Almost everything is psychosomatic, right? The mind is part of the body. That's one of my hills I will die on. And the fact that I hate that we call it mental health, because it implies that it's like a different kind of health. Like, there's health, and then there's mental health. And I'm like, no. That's like calling it like arm health. I'm like, no, you'd see your GP and you might see a specialist. But we don't treat mental health like they're providers and then they're specialists. We treat them like they're their own thing. And it's true, we're not doctors. Well, actually, a lot of us are, but not that kind of doctor. Not an MD. I'm really going to build out this liner because I have this beautiful, beautiful gold from Fantasy Cosmetica. So like, what do you do when your system and your country is failing you? Well, hopefully, you create better access to resources and, pipe dreams, which is super unfortunate. Where I'm like, oh, well, we've created this, and then it's going to further be stigmatized of like all the ironies. And then we're not going to have access to the treatment we need, and when we do, we either can't afford it or we're not going to want to know people to know about it. So you just focus on the aspect that you can. So some people are going to focus on the destigmatization of receiving mental health treatment. Some people are going to focus on the destigmatization of needing food benefits like SNAP. And some people are going to focus on, just public health awareness, such as like, how alcoholism impacts family members and do substance abuse treatment. And some people are going to focus on, destigmatizing healthcare. Some people are going to focus on providing therapy. Some people are going to focus on, because they're not professionals in the field, they're just going to be good neighbors and they're going to look out for each other. I don't think there's anything more honorable than being like, holy cow, I had no idea that people were struggling so much and that all these symptoms are all interrelated. This idea that you are your brother's keeper is like really important to me. And I don't think that, again, at least in the United States, I can't speak for other countries, but at least in the United States, it very much feels like we're stupid. Like we are profoundly ignorant of how our actions impact other people. And that if something bad happens to someone else, they, quote, must have deserved it. Instead of focusing on the, well, what did we do that there wasn't even a safety net for this person? And, someone with ADHD and autism, I'm like, well, wait a second. I don't think, and this is my 2 cents, that I needed to have depression. I don't think that was part of my growing up. I don't think that that was a gene in me, if this is your belief, that needed to be expressed. I don't think that we should, this is too cool, I don't think that we should have to suffer to become better. That's not a prerequisite. And I don't think as humans, we get to decide if our fellow man suffers or not. I think we're obligated to prevent that suffering in circumstances when we can. So, yeah, that is my take. It is all, it is all interconnected. And please don't take anything I say too far. I am summarizing the work of someone who is much more able to discuss it in depth, but and also drawing from a lot of different sources, because these are things that are clicking for me in my experience. But I do think that we need to recognize that, like, I'm not just, I'm not coming across as like a lefty or a liberal, because, which I know I do, because it's how I want to be perceived. Like, I think it's cool. Like, I'm at the age where I will never be described as cool. If I was never described as cool before, I'm definitely not at that age now. It's really just about, once you start seeing things and the pieces, that was almost the wrong word, the pieces start coming together for you, it feels like it's unethical to do anything else. It feels like it's unethical not to try to bring about radical social reform, because it's hurting people. I wouldn't be surprised one day if they found a correlation to stress and cancer. In fact, I'm sure they have. I am sure they have. But more than just a correlation, like something that's causal. So that's my reminiscence. That's what I was thinking of. And can't stay long. I gotta go teach. But thank you for listening. And as always, remember that beauty is on the inside. Thanks. Bye.